I knew something was wrong the moment I saw three people in matching neon yellow shirts standing at my gate, peering through the wrought iron bars like they were sizing up a fortress. My property in Scottsdale, Arizona, sat on 2 acres of prime desert land, bordered by my neighbors on one side and a public trail system on the other. The gate they were staring at was the only thing separating my backyard from that trail, and I'd installed it specifically to keep my German Shepherd, Duke, from wandering off during his afternoon runs. "Can I help you?" I called out from my back porch, setting down my coffee mug on the small table next to my chair. The woman in the center turned sharply, her blonde bob swinging with military precision. She had that look, the one I'd come to recognize over my 3 years in this neighborhood, the look of someone who believed their authority extended far beyond its actual boundaries. "Hello, you must be Thomas Young," she said, her voice carrying that artificially cheerful tone that made my teeth hurt. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Sonoran Hills HOA. We haven't formally met, though I've sent several emails." I had received those emails. Most of them concerned the color of my mailbox, which was apparently 2 shades too dark according to the community standards. I'd ignored them because my mailbox was exactly the color specified in the original HOA documents from when this development was built in 2018. Someone had changed the rules without proper voting procedures, and I wasn't about to play along. "What can I do for you, Patricia?" I walked down from my porch, Duke trotting alongside me. He was a good boy, well-trained, but his size alone made most people take a step back. Patricia and her 2 companions, both wearing the same yellow shirts emblazoned with Sonoran Hills Fun Run, held their ground. "We're organizing our annual community fun run next month, June 21st, and we've mapped out the most wonderful route." She pulled out a folded paper from her pocket, smoothing it against the gate. "As you can see, we'd like the route to cut through the public trail behind your property, loop around the community park, and then come back through this same trail. It would be so much more scenic than having everyone run on the streets." I looked at the map. The trail behind my house was indeed public property, managed by the city. People hiked it all the time, but what Patricia was pointing to made my jaw tighten. "You want to open my gate?" "Exactly." She beamed like I'd just solved a difficult puzzle. "Just for the morning of the run. We'd need it open from 6 a.m. until about 10 a.m., just to ensure all participants can pass through. You see, there's a small section of the trail that's washed out about a quarter-mile east of here. Rather than reroute everyone, we thought having them cut through your yard would be perfect. It's only about 50 feet from this gate to the gate on the other side of your property." I stared at her. Duke sat down next to me, his tail wagging slightly, completely unaware of the absurdity of what I was hearing. "You want 100 strangers running through my backyard?" "Not 100, Thomas. We're expecting at least 200 participants this year. Isn't that exciting?" One of the other people, a younger man with a clipboard, nodded enthusiastically. "No," I said flatly. Patricia's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I'm sorry, what?" "No. You can't run people through my private property. The trail is public, my yard is not." "But it's just for one morning," she said, her voice taking on a slight edge. "And it's for the community. Surely you can appreciate the value of community engagement, Thomas. We're all neighbors here." "The answer is still no," the clipboard guy piped up. "Actually, according to HOA bylaws, Section 12, Paragraph 4, homeowners are required to support community events when reasonable accommodation can be made." I'd read those bylaws front to back when I bought this place. That section refers to things like not blocking streets during the holiday parade or allowing the HOA to put up directional signs on street-facing property. It doesn't give you the right to access my backyard. Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Young, I really think you're being unnecessarily difficult. This is a charity event. All proceeds go to the local elementary school." "That's wonderful. I'll write them a check. But my answer about the gate is no." I turned to walk back to my house, but Patricia's voice followed me, sharper now, the artificial sweetness completely gone. "The board will be discussing this at our next meeting. I strongly suggest you reconsider." I didn't bother responding. Duke and I went inside, and I watched through my kitchen window as the 3 of them stood at my gate for another few minutes, Patricia gesturing animatedly, before they finally walked away. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was delivered by certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it, which meant they were creating a paper trail. That alone told me this was going to get ugly. The letter was 2 pages long, full of legal jargon and references to various bylaws and community standards. The essence of it was simple. The HOA board had voted, and they were requiring me to leave my back gates unlocked on June 21st from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. to accommodate the fun run route. Failure to comply would result in fines of $500 per day until I complied, plus legal fees if they had to take me to court to enforce the decision. I read it twice, sitting at my kitchen table, Duke's head resting on my knee. The thing was, I wasn't against community events. I'd participated in the neighborhood cleanup day last fall. I'd donated to the school fundraiser. I'd even helped my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, when her sprinkler system flooded her garage. But this was different. This was my property, my privacy, and my liability. The liability part was what really bothered me. 200 people running through my yard meant 200 opportunities for someone to trip on a sprinkler head, slip on the stepping stones I'd installed near my garden, or get spooked by Duke if he was outside. Arizona was a premises liability state. If someone got hurt on my property, even if they were there with permission, I could be held responsible if there was any hazard, obvious or not. I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, the same one who'd handled my house closing. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, and he managed to squeeze me in that afternoon. "They can't do this," Marcus said after reading the letter. He was a sharp guy, early 40s, with a reputation for not backing down from fights. "The HOA has no authority to grant themselves access to your private property for an event, charity, or otherwise. This is overreach, plain and simple." So what do? Write them back. Refuse formally, cite property rights, and tell them any attempt to fine you will be met with legal action. He leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing, Thomas. HOA boards like this, especially ones run by people like Patricia Henderson, they don't care about being right. They care about winning. This could get expensive and time-consuming." "I'm not backing down." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Then let's make sure we're covered. I'll draft a response. In the meantime, document everything, every interaction, every email, every letter." I left his office feeling both validated and anxious. That evening, I did something I probably should have done earlier. I researched Patricia Henderson. What I found was enlightening. Patricia had been HOA president for 4 years. Before that, she'd been involved in a different HOA in Tempe, where she'd allegedly tried to force a homeowner to remove a wheelchair ramp because it violated aesthetic guidelines. That case had made local news, and the HOA had lost badly in court. She'd resigned shortly after and apparently moved to Scottsdale, where she'd quickly climbed the ranks of our HOA board. There were posts on neighborhood forums, complaints about her aggressive enforcement of minor rules, stories about fines issued for things like trash cans being visible from the street for 5 minutes too long, or garden gnomes being a 1/4 inch taller than the allowed decoration height. She ran the HOA like a fiefdom, and according to several posts, most homeowners just paid the fines rather than fight her, because it was easier. I wasn't most homeowners. Marcus sent the response letter 3 days later. It was professional but firm, outlining my property rights, refuting the HOA's interpretation of the bylaws, and warning that any fines would be challenged in court. I had him send it certified mail, just like they'd done to me. Patricia's response came within 48 hours, and it wasn't a letter. It was a knock on my door at 7 in the morning. I answered in my sweatpants and a t-shirt, Duke barking behind me until I told him to sit. Patricia stood on my doorstep with 2 other board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. One was a thin man in his 50s named Richard something, and the other was a woman about Patricia's age with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. "Thomas, we need to talk," Patricia said without preamble. "It's 7 in the morning. This won't take long. May we come in?" "No." I stepped onto my front porch, closing the door behind me so Duke wouldn't get out. "What do you want?" Patricia's expression was all business now, no fake smiles. "Your lawyer's letter was very aggressive, Thomas. The board is quite concerned about your lack of community spirit." "My community spirit is fine. My willingness to let strangers run through my yard is non-existent. Those are two different things. Richard spoke up, his voice nasal and irritating. The board has the authority to levy fines, Mr. Young. We're trying to avoid that, but you're not giving us much choice. You have plenty of choices. You can reroute your fun run. You can fix the washed-out section of the public trail. You can cancel the event. What you can't do is force me to open my property. The dark-haired woman, who hadn't spoken yet, finally chimed in. What if we provided insurance? Would that make you more comfortable? It was the first reasonable thing any of them had said. What kind of insurance? The HOA has a general liability policy. We could add a rider specifically for this event covering any incidents that might occur on your property during those 4 hours. I considered this. Send me the policy details. Let me have my lawyer review it. Patricia's jaw tightened. That's not necessary. Our insurance agent has assured us that my lawyer reviews it, or the answer stays no. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Patricia nodded curtly. Fine. You'll have the documentation by tomorrow. They left, and I went back inside, my coffee now cold. Duke looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and I scratched behind his ears. This is getting ridiculous, buddy. The insurance documents arrived the next day, but not in the way I expected. Instead of being emailed or mailed, they were shoved into my mailbox, loose pages crumpled and folded. I took them to Marcus's office that afternoon. He spread them out on his desk, reading carefully. After about 10 minutes, he looked up at me and shook his head. This is garbage. The coverage is minimal. The deductible is $10,000, and there's an exclusion clause for dog-related incidents. If Duke so much as barks at someone and they claim emotional distress, you'd be on the hook. So it's useless. Worse than useless. It's designed to look like protection while offering you almost none. If you agreed to this and something happened, you'd be in a worse position than if you'd just said no from the start. I leaned back in my chair, frustration building. What's my move here? Marcus drummed his fingers on his desk, thinking. Here's an idea. You want to make this go away, right? But you also want to protect yourself if they somehow force the issue or if you decide, for whatever reason, to allow it. So let's flip the script. Let's give them exactly what they're asking for, but with conditions that actually protect you. What kind of conditions? He grinned. And I recognized the look of a lawyer who just had a brilliant idea. A liability waiver. A comprehensive, ironclad, detailed liability waiver that every single participant in that fun run has to sign before they set foot on your property. We make it so thorough, so specific, and so protective of your interests that either they'll agree and you'll be covered, or they'll back off because it's too much hassle. How detailed are we talking? Give me a week. I'll draft something that would make their insurance company weep. 6 days later, Marcus called me to his office. On his desk sat a stack of paper that looked more like a novel than a legal document. Is that it? I asked, staring at the pile. 6 pages, single-spaced, every possible scenario covered, every liability assigned, every waiver clause you could possibly need. Anyone who signs this is acknowledging that they understand the risks, accept full responsibility for any injury or damage, waive all rights to sue you or your homeowner's insurance, and agree to defend you in court if anyone else tries to sue based on anything that happens during their crossing of your property. I picked up the first page and started reading. It was dense, full of legal terminology, but the gist was clear. By signing this waiver, participants acknowledged risks including but not limited to uneven terrain, sprinkler systems, landscape features, wildlife encounters, domestic animals, weather conditions, and their own physical limitations. They agreed that they were crossing my property entirely at their own risk, that they had adequate health insurance, and that they would hold me harmless for any injuries, damages, or losses sustained. There were clauses about photography rights, acknowledgement that my security cameras would be recording, provisions about emergency services access, requirements for participants to carry identification, and stipulations that anyone under 18 had to have parental consent with notarized signatures. This is beautiful, I said. Page 4 is my favorite, Marcus said. That's where they acknowledge that your dog may be present and that they're aware German shepherds are large animals that may bark, run, or otherwise behave like dogs, and that they accept all risks associated with being on property where a dog resides. I flipped to page 4. Sure enough, there was an entire section dedicated to Duke, including a clause requiring participants to not approach, touch, or feed him, and acknowledging that failure to follow these guidelines voided all other protections of the waiver. How much do I owe you for this masterpiece? Consider it included in the retainer. I enjoyed writing it too much to charge extra. He handed me a USB drive. Here's the digital version. I suggest you email it to Patricia today with a cover letter saying that you've reconsidered, and while you're still not enthusiastic about the idea, you're willing to accommodate the fun run provided every participant signs this waiver in advance. Put the ball in their court. I went home and drafted the email immediately. I kept it professional and brief. Patricia, after further consideration and consultation with my attorney, I'm willing to allow the June 21st fun run to cross my property under the following conditions. Every participant must sign the attached liability waiver prior to the event. Signed waivers must be provided to me at least 48 hours before the event. No one who is not signed will be permitted to cross my property, and I will be present to verify compliance. If these terms are acceptable, please confirm in writing. Thomas Young. I attached the PDF of the waiver and hit send. Then I sat back and waited. The response came 3 hours later. My phone rang, an unknown number with a Scottsdale area code. I answered. "What the hell is this?" Patricia's voice was shrill, all pretense of professionalism gone. "Hello, Patricia. I assume you're referring to the waiver. This is 6 pages long. It's completely unreasonable. It's comprehensive. If you want people running through my property, I need to protect myself. Those are my terms. No one is going to sign this. It's ridiculous. Acknowledge the presence of wildlife, including but not limited to scorpions, snakes, coyotes, and javelinas. We're in a residential neighborhood. We're in Scottsdale, Arizona. Patricia, we're in the desert. I've had all of those things on my property in the past year. If someone's going to be here, they need to know what they're walking into. This section about security cameras is invasive. You can't film people without their consent. The cameras are on my property, filming my property. The waiver simply informs participants that they will be recorded. If they don't want to be filmed, they don't have to cross my yard. Simple. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. The board will never agree to this. That's fine. Then reroute your fun run. I believe I suggested that from the beginning. You're being deliberately obstructive. I'm being deliberately protective of myself and my property. There's a difference. She hung up without another word. I actually smiled. Marcus had been right. The waiver was so thorough, so demanding, that the HOA would either have to back down or commit to a level of organization and liability that they clearly weren't prepared for. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing from Patricia or the HOA. The fun run was scheduled for June 21st, which was now less than 3 weeks away. I assumed they'd rerouted and moved on. Then I came home from work on a Wednesday evening to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the city, specifically from the Parks and Recreation Department. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint that my back gate was blocking access to the public trail and creating a safety hazard. An inspector would be coming by within the next week to assess the situation. I called Marcus immediately. "It's a bogus complaint," he said after I read him the notice. "Your gate doesn't block the trail. The trail runs behind your property, and your gate provides access from your yard to the trail, not the other way around. But someone's trying to make trouble." Patricia. "Probably. Here's what you do. When the inspector comes, be cooperative. Show them the setup, explain that the gate is for your use to access the trail from your property and that it doesn't impede public access in any way. Take photos, have documentation ready about when you installed it and the permits you pulled." I had pulled permits. Everything about my property was by the book because I'd learned early on that HOAs looked for any excuse to create problems. When the inspector came 3 days later, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Jim, I showed him everything. We walked the property line, examined the gate, and looked at how the trail ran completely unobstructed on the public side. "Yeah, this is fine," Jim said, making notes on his tablet. "Your gate opens onto your property, not onto the trail. There's no violation here. Whoever filed this complaint Either doesn't understand property lines or is just trying to cause problems. Probably the latter, I said. He gave me a sympathetic look. HOA dispute? How'd you guess? 20 years in this job, I've seen it all. HOAs are responsible for about half our complaint calls, and 90% of them are bogus. He finished his notes. You'll get a letter in a few days saying there's no violation found. If whoever filed this tries again, the city will start ignoring them. True to his word, I received a letter from the city 5 days later, officially stating that no violation had been found and the complaint was closed. I scanned it and added it to the growing folder of documentation I was keeping about this entire situation. The next move came from an unexpected direction. I got a call from my homeowner's insurance company. Apparently, they'd received an inquiry from the Sonoran Hills HOA about my policy coverage, specifically regarding liability for community events on my property. We told them we couldn't discuss your policy with them, my agent, Linda, explained. But I wanted to give you a heads up. Why is your HOA asking about your insurance? I explained the entire situation. Linda listened, then sighed. Thomas, if you let this event happen, your liability exposure is significant. Your policy would cover injuries up to your limit, which is $500,000, but your premiums would likely increase after any claim, and if multiple people were injured, you could be looking at costs beyond your coverage. That's why I drafted the waiver. Smart. But here's the thing. Waivers help, but they're not bulletproof. If someone gets seriously hurt and decides to sue, they'll argue the waiver isn't enforceable. You'd probably win eventually, but it would be expensive and stressful. So you're saying I shouldn't allow it. I'm saying that if you do allow it, make sure you have everything documented, everyone signed, and be prepared for potential complications. Personally, I'd tell them to pound sand and reroute their run. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of all this settling on my shoulders. What had started as a simple no to an unreasonable request had turned into weeks of fighting, bogus complaints, insurance inquiries, and legal maneuvering. All over a fun run. That evening, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I went to an HOA board meeting. They were held the first Thursday of every month in the community center, and according to the HOA website, all homeowners were welcome to attend. The community center was a nice building, well-maintained, with a large meeting room that had about 30 chairs set up in rows. When I arrived at 7 p.m., about 15 people were already there, most of them older residents I recognized from around the neighborhood. Patricia sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members, including Richard and the dark-haired woman from before. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she didn't say anything. I took a seat in the back row and waited. The meeting started with routine business, approval of last month's minutes, a financial report, discussion about repainting the community center trim. It was all very boring and procedural. Then they got to new business, and Patricia's demeanor changed. We have an ongoing situation with a homeowner who is refusing to cooperate with our annual charity fun run, she began, not looking at me. Despite multiple attempts to reach a reasonable compromise, this homeowner has put up legal roadblocks and made unreasonable demands. Are you talking about me? I said from the back. Everyone turned. Patricia's face flushed. Mr. Young, if you have something to say, you can speak during the public comment period. When is that? At the end of the meeting. Fine, I settled back in my chair. Continue. She did, laying out a completely one-sided version of events that made it sound like I was being difficult for no reason, refusing to support a charity event, and hiding behind lawyers instead of being a good neighbor. She conveniently left out the parts about demanding access to my private property, offering inadequate insurance, and filing bogus complaints with the city. When she finished, Richard moved to authorize legal action against me for violating HOA bylaws, specifically the section about supporting community events. The dark-haired woman seconded the motion. All in favor? Patricia said. 4 hands went up. The 5th board member, an elderly man I didn't know, abstained. Motion carries. The HOA will pursue legal remedies to ensure compliance with community standards. Patricia looked directly at me. Mr. Young, you'll be receiving notification of fines totaling $500 per day starting June 1st until you agree to remove the obstacles to the fun run route. June 1st was 2 days away. The public comment period came after another 15 minutes of boring business. When Patricia finally, reluctantly, acknowledged that it was time for homeowner comments, I stood up. I'm Thomas Young, 4782 Desert Vista Drive. I'd like to address the characterization of my position that was just presented to this board. You have 3 minutes, Patricia said coldly. I walked to the front of the room so everyone could see me. The HOA has demanded that I leave my back gates unlocked for 4 hours to allow the fun run to cross my private property. Not the public trail behind my property, which is already accessible, but my actual backyard. When I refused, I was told I was violating community standards. When I offered a compromise in the form of a comprehensive liability waiver that would protect both me and the HOA from any legal consequences, I was told it was unreasonable. I pulled out my phone and projected my email on the screen at the front of the room, showing the waiver I'd sent. This waiver was drafted by my attorney to ensure that if anyone gets hurt on my property during this event, I'm not held liable for their injuries. It includes standard language about assumption of risk, acknowledgement of hazards, and waiver of the right to sue. This is the kind of waiver that any reasonable organization would require for an event like this. Murmurs rippled through the small audience. A few people were reading the projected document on their phones. Instead of working with me, the HOA filed a false complaint with the city claiming my gate blocked public trail access. That complaint was investigated and dismissed. The HOA also contacted my insurance company trying to get information about my policy, which is a violation of my privacy. Patricia stood up. Your time is up, Mr. Young. I'm not finished. Yes, you are. Please sit down. I have a right to. Security, please escort Mr. Young out. I hadn't even noticed the security guard standing by the door, a bored-looking guy in his 20s who clearly didn't want to be involved in this. He walked over hesitantly. Madam, if he's a homeowner, he has a right to speak during public comment, the guard said. He's being disruptive, Patricia snapped. I'm being factual, I countered. Everything I've said can be documented. The question is why the board is so insistent on accessing my property when there are other options available. The washed-out section of trail that you're using as justification is on city property. Have you contacted the city about repairing it? Have you considered any route that doesn't involve private property? One of the other homeowners, an older woman in the third row, raised her hand. I'd like to hear the answer to that. Why can't we just reroute? Patricia's face was now bright red. The current route is optimal for timing and scenery. We've used variations of it for 3 years. But you've never needed to cross private property before, I said. Because the trail wasn't washed out before, Richard interjected. This is a temporary situation. Then temporarily reroute, I said. Problem solved. The meeting devolved from there. Several other homeowners started asking questions, and it became clear that Patricia hadn't actually explained to the board or the community that she was demanding access to private property. Most people had assumed the route was entirely on public trails and streets. The elderly board member who had abstained earlier, whose nameplate read George Brennan, spoke up. Patricia, I wasn't aware we were asking to cross private property. That seems like a significant liability issue for the HOA. It's already been addressed, Patricia said quickly. Our insurance covers it. Does it? I asked. Because the insurance documents you provided to me specifically excluded several types of incidents and had a $10,000 deductible. If someone gets hurt, who pays that deductible? The HOA, the individual homeowner, me? George looked at Patricia. I'd like to see those insurance documents. This should have been discussed in detail before we voted to take legal action. The meeting fell apart after that. Patricia tried to maintain control, but too many people were asking questions, and it became obvious that she'd been operating without full transparency. The meeting was adjourned early, with George calling for a special session to review the fun run planning and the insurance coverage. As everyone filed out, George approached me. He was a tall man, probably in his 70s, with white hair and a kind face. Mr. Young, I apologize. I should have asked more questions before voting on previous matters related to this. Patricia has a way of presenting things that makes dissent seem unreasonable. I appreciate that, I said. May I see the full waiver your attorney drafted? I emailed it to him right there. He thanked me and left, and I walked to my car feeling like, maybe, finally, someone reasonable was paying attention. The fines started arriving on June 1st, as promised. $500 per day for failure to comply with HOA directives regarding community event cooperation. I photographed each one and forwarded them to Marcus, who sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA on my behalf, demanding they stop all fines and withdraw the legal action. They didn't stop. By June 10th, I had accumulated $5,000 in fines. The HOA sent a letter saying that if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. "Let them try," Marcus said when I called him, panicking slightly at the idea of a lien. "A lien for bogus fines won't hold up in court, and the moment they file it, will countersue for harassment, legal fees, and damages. They're overplaying their hand." On June 12th, 9 days before the scheduled fun run, I received an unexpected visitor. George Brennan knocked on my door in the early evening, carrying a folder. "Mr. Young, do you have a few minutes?" I invited him in. Duke sniffed him thoroughly before deciding he was acceptable and flopping down on his dog bed. George and I sat at my kitchen table. "I've spent the last week reviewing all the documentation related to this fun run situation," he said, opening his folder. "The insurance policy, the bylaws, the correspondence between you and Patricia, and your attorney's waiver. I've also consulted with my own attorney because I'm concerned about the HOA's liability exposure here. And Patricia has put the HOA in a terrible position. The insurance we have doesn't adequately cover an event like this, especially not one that crosses private property. The waiver you provided is actually quite reasonable, and if we were smart, we'd require it. But more than that, we have no legal standing to demand access to your property in the first place. The bylaw Patricia is citing doesn't apply to this situation." I tried to tell her that. "I know, and I've now told the rest of the board. We held an emergency meeting last night without Patricia to discuss this." "Without her? Can you do that?" "Technically, yes. As long as we have a quorum and provide notice to all board members. She was notified. She chose not to attend." He pulled out a document. "The board voted 4-1 to cancel the fun run route that crosses your property and to withdraw all fines levied against you. We're also going to issue a formal apology." I stared at the document, barely believing what I was reading. Patricia was the one vote against? She didn't vote. She wasn't there. But I suspect if she had been, yes, she would have been the dissenting vote. So it's over? The fun run dispute is over. The route has been changed to stay entirely on public streets and the accessible portions of the trail. However, there's a larger issue. He hesitated. Several homeowners have come forward in the past week with complaints about Patricia's management of the HOA. The investigation into the fun run insurance opened up questions about other expenditures and decisions she's made. We've discovered some concerning irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that may require law enforcement involvement. I can't say more right now, but I wanted you to know that your refusal to back down on this issue led to a much-needed examination of how the HOA has been run. So thank you." He left shortly after, and I sat in my kitchen trying to process what had just happened. The fines were withdrawn. The fun run was rerouted. And apparently, Patricia's reign as HOA president was coming under serious scrutiny. The fun run happened on June 21st, as scheduled. I actually went and watched part of it, standing on the public trail behind my house with Duke on his leash. The route stayed entirely on streets and public property, looping through the neighborhood in a way that was probably more interesting for participants anyway. People seemed happy, the weather was perfect, and there were no incidents. Patricia was noticeably absent. 2 weeks later, on July 3rd, I was watering my front garden when I saw police cars pull up to a house 3 streets over. I didn't think much of it until my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called me that evening. "Did you hear? Patricia Henderson was arrested?" "What?" "It's all over the neighborhood Facebook page. Apparently the HOA board discovered she'd been embezzling money for over 2 years, something like $40,000. I immediately went to the neighborhood page. Sure enough, there were posts with photos of Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs. The official statement from the HOA board, posted by George Brennan, was carefully worded but clear. An audit had revealed significant financial discrepancies, and the matter had been turned over to the Scottsdale Police Department for investigation. Over the following days, more details emerged. Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, falsifying records, and paying herself unauthorized bonuses. The discovery had started when George had questioned the insurance coverage for the fun run and found that the policy Patricia had referenced didn't actually exist. She'd been showing the board fake insurance documents for years, pocketing the money that was supposed to go to premiums. The investigation into the fun run had unraveled everything. Marcus called me when the story hit the local news. "You know this all started because you wouldn't let them cross your yard, right?" "I'm aware. If you just rolled over and signed their inadequate waiver or let them intimidate you with fines, none of this would have come to light. Patricia would still be stealing from the HOA, and homeowners would still be paying for insurance coverage they didn't actually have. I just wanted to protect my property. And in doing so, you protected the entire neighborhood. That's pretty good." The legal proceedings took months. Patricia was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. The HOA hired a professional management company to handle finances going forward, and George Brennan became the interim president. One of his first acts was to review all the fines and penalties that had been issued in the previous 4 years. Dozens of homeowners had been fined for minor or questionable violations, many of which were overturned. The HOA sent out formal apologies and refunded thousands of dollars. In August, George knocked on my door again, this time with a plate of cookies his wife had made. "I wanted to personally thank you," he said as we sat on my back porch, watching Duke chase a butterfly. "What you did, standing your ground like that, it took courage. A lot of people just pay the fines and move on because it's easier. You didn't, and it made all the difference." "I was just protecting my property," I said, echoing what I'd told Marcus. "You were protecting your rights. That's bigger than property. Patricia counted on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. You called her bluff, and when she doubled down, you still didn't budge. That's what exposed everything else." "The waiver helped," I admitted. "It made her so angry that she got sloppy." George laughed. "That 6-page waiver was brilliant. I showed it to my attorney, and he said it was one of the most thorough liability documents he'd seen for a community event. When Patricia called it unreasonable, she revealed that she wasn't actually interested in protecting the HOA or its members. She just wanted to win." We talked for a while longer about the changes coming to the HOA, about the new management company, and about plans to actually fix the washed-out section of trail in partnership with the city. George had submitted a proposal for HOA funds to be allocated toward the repair, which would benefit everyone who used the trail. As he was leaving, he turned back. "By the way, we're planning next year's fun run already. Different route entirely, proper insurance, all the permits in order. Would you be interested in participating?" I smiled. "I'll think about it." "And Thomas? If you ever want to join the board, we could use someone who actually reads the bylaws and isn't afraid to say no when something's wrong." I didn't join the board, but I did start attending meetings regularly. It was important, I realized, to stay informed and involved. HOAs only became tyrannical when good people checked out and let power-hungry individuals like Patricia run unchecked. The neighborhood changed after that summer. People were more engaged, more willing to question decisions, and more aware of their rights. The new management company brought transparency and professionalism. Fines were issued only for legitimate violations and only after proper notice and opportunity to correct. My gates remained locked, except when I was using them. Duke continued to enjoy his run through the backyard to the trail. And the 6-page liability waiver that Marcus had drafted with such care sat in a folder on my desk, a reminder that sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and that standing your ground, even when it's exhausting and frustrating, is worth it. I never did write that check to the elementary school that Patricia had claimed would benefit from the fun run. Instead, I did some research and found out that the school had never been contacted about any fundraiser. The charity event had been another one of Patricia's fabrications, a way to make people feel guilty about not cooperating. When I learned that, I actually did donate to the school, directly, through their official fundraising program. I also volunteered to help with their STEM fair, something I'd been meaning to do anyway. In September, the HOA held elections for board positions. George ran for president officially and won unanimously. Two other homeowners who'd been vocal about the need for transparency and accountability also won seats. The board looked completely different from the one that had tried to fine me into submission just months earlier. At the first meeting after the election, George proposed a new bylaw. Any request for access to private property for HOA events would require a 75% vote of all homeowners, not just the board, and would need to include comprehensive liability coverage and owner consent. It passed without opposition. He also proposed rescinding the vague community support bylaw that Patricia had misused to justify her demands. That passed too. I ran into Richard, the former board member who'd seconded Patricia's motion against me, at the grocery store in October. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but I nodded at him politely. "Thomas," he said, stopping his cart, "I owe you an apology. I should have looked more carefully at what Patricia was asking us to approve. I trusted her judgment, and that was a mistake." "Apology accepted," I said. "We all want to trust the people we elect to leadership positions. The important thing is what you do when you realize that trust was misplaced." "I resigned from the board," he said. "I didn't feel like I deserved to stay after everything that happened." "That's your choice to make. But for what it's worth, admitting you made a mistake is more than Patricia ever did." We talked for a few more minutes, and I left feeling like maybe the neighborhood really was healing from the damage Patricia had caused. The trail behind my house was finally repaired in November. The city and the HOA split the cost, and the work was done properly, with good drainage and reinforced edges to prevent future washouts. I took Duke out the day it reopened, and we ran the full loop, which was about 3 miles of beautiful desert scenery. As we ran, I passed other neighbors doing the same thing, and several of them waved or said hello. Mrs. Chen was walking with her daughter, both of them wearing matching visors. The couple from 2 doors down was hiking with their kids, pointing out cactus flowers and lizards. It felt like a community, a real one, built on mutual respect and reasonable boundaries rather than arbitrary rules and forced compliance. When Thanksgiving came around, the HOA organized a potluck in the community center. It was optional, of course, and there was no pressure to attend. I went, bringing a green bean casserole that was my mom's recipe. Duke stayed home, happy with a new bone to chew. The turnout was impressive, probably 70 or 80 people, and the mood was genuinely festive. George gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and acknowledging that the previous months had been difficult but ultimately necessary. "We're stronger now," he said, "because we learned that a community isn't about forcing everyone to comply with arbitrary rules. It's about working together, respecting each other's boundaries, and building something we can all be proud of." People applauded, and I found myself smiling, genuinely feeling like I was part of something good. Later, as I was getting a second helping of sweet potato casserole, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was probably in her 40s, with red hair and a friendly smile. "You're Thomas Young, right? The guy with the gates?" I nodded, unsure where this was going. "I'm Rebecca Morris. I live over on Saguaro Lane. I just wanted to say thank you. I was one of the people Patricia fined for stupid things, and I just paid them because I didn't know I could fight back. When you stood up to her, it gave me the courage to request a review of my fines. I got back almost $2,000. "I'm glad," I said, genuinely meaning it. "A lot of us are glad you didn't back down. It would have been easier for you to just let them cross your yard, but you didn't, and it changed everything." She walked away, and I stood there with my plate of food, thinking about how strange life was. I'd bought this house in Scottsdale looking for peace and quiet, a place to settle down after years of apartment living. I'd never intended to become the guy who took on the HOA, who exposed corruption, or who changed how the neighborhood operated. I just wanted to protect my property and my dog. But sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone, whether you intend to or not. Christmas lights went up in December, and for the first time in the HOA's history, there was no formal inspection of displays for code compliance. The new guidelines simply said that lights should be in good repair and taken down by mid-January. That was it. No restrictions on colors, no limits on decorations, no mandatory participation. My house had simple white lights along the roofline and a small tree in the front window. Duke wore a Santa hat for exactly 5 seconds before shaking it off and giving me a look that clearly said, "We're not doing this." On Christmas Eve, I was sitting on my front porch with a mug of hot chocolate when George walked by with his wife, looking at the neighborhood lights. "Beautiful evening," he called out. "Want to join me?" I gestured to the empty chairs on my porch. They did, and we sat together, watching the sun set over the desert, the mountains in the distance turning purple and gold. George's wife, Martha, was a retired teacher, and she told stories about her years in the classroom that had me laughing until my sides hurt. "You should come to our New Year's party," Martha said. "Just a small thing, a few neighbors, some food. Nothing fancy." "I'd like that," I said. As they left, George paused. "You know, Thomas, when you first moved in, Patricia told me you were going to be trouble. She said she could tell you were the type who wouldn't respect the community standards. And? She was right in a way. You were trouble, just not the kind she meant. You were the kind of trouble that makes things better." I thought about that after they left. Patricia had seen me as a threat because I read the bylaws, asked questions, and didn't automatically defer to her authority. She'd been right to worry, just for all the wrong reasons. The year ended quietly. No more drama, no more legal battles, no more certified letters or bogus complaints. Just a neighborhood learning to be a community again, with all the messiness and beauty that entailed. On New Year's Day, I went for a run with Duke on the newly repaired trail. It was early, the air cold and crisp, the sky that perfect shade of blue you only get in the desert. As we ran, I thought about everything that had happened since that day in May, when Patricia had shown up at my gate with her fun run map. I'd learned a lot. I'd learned that standing your ground matters, even when it's hard. I'd learned that bullies count on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. I'd learned that sometimes a 6-page liability waiver is the perfect weapon against unreasonable demands. But mostly, I'd learned that communities are built by people who care enough to say no when no is the right answer, and yes when yes serves everyone. Duke barked at a roadrunner that darted across the trail, and I laughed, picking up the pace. We ran all the way to the end of the loop and back, my gates waiting for us, locked and secure, exactly as they should be. In February, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Insurance. Patricia's insurance fraud had extended beyond the HOA to personal policies she'd manipulated. They wanted to interview me as part of their investigation. I spent an afternoon with an investigator, walking through everything I'd discovered about the fake insurance documents and the inadequate coverage she'd provided. "Your documentation is excellent," the investigator told me. "Most people don't keep records this detailed." "I had a good lawyer," I said, thinking of Marcus. The investigator smiled. "And good instincts. If you'd accepted that original insurance offer and someone had been hurt on your property, you would have discovered the coverage was fake only after you tried to make a claim. You saved yourself a lot of trouble." I just wanted to protect myself. That's what everyone should do. Unfortunately, most people trust that HOA boards are acting in good faith. This case is a good reminder that trust should be verified. By March, the legal proceedings against Patricia were winding down. She'd already started serving her prison sentence, and the restitution payments were being distributed to the HOA and individual homeowners she'd defrauded. The amount I received for the wrongful fines was modest, only $500 since the fines had been rescinded before I actually paid them, but it felt like vindication nonetheless. The neighborhood moved on. New families moved in, and the HOA welcome packets now included a full copy of the bylaws, contact information for the board, and a clear explanation of homeowner rights. George had made transparency a priority, and it showed. In April, I finally used my liability waiver, not for an HOA event, but for a private party I threw for some friends. We were doing an obstacle course in my backyard, and Marcus suggested having everyone sign a modified version of the waiver, just to be safe. My friends thought it was hilarious and signed enthusiastically, making jokes about the acknowledged presence of domestic animals clause, while Duke watched them with his typical stoic patience. No one got hurt, the party was a success, and the waiver went back into my files, a tool I hoped I'd never need but was glad to have. By the time summer rolled around again, a full year after the fun run debacle, the neighborhood was preparing for another community event. This one was a block party, entirely on public streets, with proper permits, adequate insurance, and voluntary participation. I helped set up tables and hang decorations. Duke, wearing a bandana for the occasion, became the unofficial mascot, letting kids pet him and posing for photos. The event was simple, friendly, and exactly what a community gathering should be. As the sun set and people started packing up, George found me breaking down tables. "Next year, we're thinking of doing the fun run again," he said. "Properly planned, fully insured, route entirely on public property. What do you think?" "I think that sounds great. Would you run it?" I looked at Duke, who was sprawled in the grass, exhausted from all the attention. "Yeah," I said. "I think we would." And we did. The following June, exactly 2 years after Patricia had first shown up at my gate with her demands, I ran the Sonoran Hills Fun Run with 200 other neighbors. The route was beautiful, the organization was flawless, and no one had to cross private property or sign a 6-page waiver. Duke ran with me, keeping perfect pace, and when we crossed the finish line, George was there with medals for all participants and special treats for the dogs. "You know what the best part is?" George said as he handed me my medal. "This event raised $5,000 for the elementary school. Real money, properly accounted for, going exactly where it's supposed to." I hung the medal on my wall when I got home, right next to my framed copy of the 6-page liability waiver. They told the same story, really. One about standing your ground when you're right, and one about coming together when it matters. My gates remained locked, my property remained private, and my community remained strong. That was all I'd ever wanted. And in the end, despite the fights and the frustration and the fear, it was exactly what I got. The desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I sat on my back porch with Duke at my feet, a cold drink in my hand, watching the day end. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were playing, people were walking dogs, and life was happening in all its messy, beautiful normalcy. I'd protected what was mine, and, in doing so, helped protect what was ours. That 6-page waiver had been more than just a legal document. It had been a line in the sand, a statement that rights matter and boundaries matter and standing up to bullies matters. Patricia Henderson was in prison, paying for her crimes. The HOA was healthy and functional. The neighborhood was thriving. And I was exactly where I wanted to be, in a home I'd fought to protect, surrounded by a community I'd accidentally helped save. Not bad for a guy who just didn't want strangers running through his yard,